I've just started recording, so I don't forget to do that
No,
because I'll
that's
likely
okay.
forget. So, yeah.
It's more that I don't talk about the chocolate I was eating, right?
Uh,
So I think we should start if you've started the recording. Is everybody good to start?
Sure.
People might join us late. So, hi everybody, and welcome to our Ascolite Business SIG. I'm joined today by Guy Bate, who is also part of the organising committee from University of Auckland. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lynn Gribble from the University of New South Wales. In addition to, and we have Sandy Barker from University of South Australia also logging in and joining us as well. So for those of you who are listening to this later online, Ascolite runs the Business SIG not only for our members, but also for anybody who would like to keep up to date with what's going on around the place and also be able to keep their professional development going. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from Bidjigal country of the Eora Nation. This always was, it always is, and always will be Indigenous land. I pay my respect to elders past and present. And perhaps if you'd like to just pop in the chat where you're coming to us today from, that would also be useful. I think as we go into today's session, which we're going to run as an in conversation, and I'll talk a bit more about Charmaine and Susie in a minute who are going to join me. But I've been teaching sustainable development goals and ethics for the last 15 years, a little bit more. So it is a really big opportunity for us today to look at what is responsible business education more broadly. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I've been involved in Ascolite fairly seriously for about 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years, and do a lot of work in the AI space, but also a lot of work around this sustainability space. I might pass across to you, Charmaine, first, and to introduce yourself, and then to you, Susie, and then we'll get going with our panel for today, if that's okay with everyone. So over to you, Charmaine.
Thanks, Lynn. My name's Charmaine Logan-Fleming, and I am the academic lead for the course Community Internship and Partnerships for Sustainable Development Goals from Griffith University. So basically, my course comes under the umbrella of Work Integrated Learning, and we offer this course at undergraduate and master's level, and students enroll in the course from all disciplines across the university. The cohort size usually ranges from about 140 to 160 students each trimester. So that's a little bit about myself. So I'm in the Will space.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And Susie Chant from University of South Australia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susie, coming to you today from Ghana country. So I coordinate our largest undergraduate Bachelor of Business core course that focuses on responsible business and the sustainable development goals. It incorporates all 17 sustainable development goals. And we usually have a cohort of around about 400 per delivery, but across the year it would total about 1,200 students.
And I think when we do talk about business, we talk about very, very large courses often. So I've been convening a course that has somewhere between 1,500 and 1,700 students a term. We run a 3-term system still currently at University of New South Wales. And so, a large course could be anything from, 75 students through to, the large numbers I'm talking. And I think that what I'm really curious to explore today with Charmaine and Susie, and so we thought it would be useful to have a conversation and to explore what it means to teach responsible business practices to students where they are core versus elective students. What do you find about the students that come into your course and what do they know about sustainability? So for me, I teach largely compulsory core, students who are also largely international students. And so I find that there's a really big gap between perhaps their lived experience and what they're coming in for. They don't come to the front door going, yippee, let me learn about sustainability. Even though if you ask them in the street, just randomly, do you believe in the need for sustainability, they would say yes, but they don't come in necessarily knowing the value of the course. But what I do see is that over the 10 weeks or so that I work with them, there's this really big shift in what they think is really important. And recently, one of the other team members said to me that somebody came up and said, I've started to pay more for my electricity because I want to have sustainable electricity. And, you know, and you go, it's often the little things that make a big step. So I'd really like to hear from your lived experience. And Susie, we might start with you first on this one about, do you think that students, you know, are your students core or elective or a combination? And do you think it differs for those students? And do you think they really know about sustainability when they arrive?
Sure. So teaching in a core course, you're working with students from all the different variations of the business degrees. So that we have digital business, international business, the straight Bachelor of Business, business management, entrepreneurship, but it is also an elective course across the whole university. So for most students, it's not just those with a pre-existing interest in business and sustainability. It's a much broader cohort. So it does create a bit of a challenge. You know, how do we make the sustainable development goals feel relevant and urgent for everyone, you know, whether they're studying accounting or marketing. So we sort of focus on linking them to real business practice early in the course. And, you know, we show how ethical leadership, sustainable decision-making, how things like that are becoming core competencies in the job market. I had a meeting just this morning that involved someone in the meeting that was a CSO or previously a CSO in their organisation. So corporate sustainability officers are becoming mainstream as part of the C-suite in many corporations now. So it's really required that students have that knowledge. But in terms of gaps in student knowledge, a lot of students come with a general awareness of sustainability, maybe that they've learned at secondary school. You know, it could be they build a community garden or they had good recycling protocols, but they don't yet see how the Sustainable Development Goals relate to business decisions and their own future career goals in organisations. They don't have an understanding of the triple bottom line. They don't have an understanding of ethical theories. That's another big thing that we teach in the course, you know, real world business dilemmas. But ultimately, we want students to leave with a clear framework for evaluating responsible business behaviour through that lens of the Sustainable Development Goals and ethical reasoning. So what we're trying to do is bridge that gap in their professional confidence and encouraging them to see themselves not just as passive learners, but more as future change makers.
Mm. And what about for you, Charmaine? Because, you know, a little bit different cohort again.
Definitely. So my course is composed of students from both, you know, core and elective courses. And I've found the students taking the course as an elective are generally more engaged with social justice issues and have a passion for working with marginalised community members whilst addressing their SDGs. So they enrol in the course to create impact and change in the community through their internship experiences. And some of the students have really personal connections to organisations they're volunteering for. So such as some of the students might have been homeless at some stage in their life and they're wanting to give back to organisations such as, you know, we work with the father, Chris at Riley's Youth Off the Streets. Community gardens, we work with them as well. Australia, they're providing, you know, education on health, healthy eating and green spaces for fresh produce and building communities. So they're also passionate about how implementing SDGs into the organisations can provide positive outcomes for the organisation and the community members that they're serving at the time. Students from core courses can be a bit of a mixed cohort. So at the start of the internship journey, some of the students are not engaged with the ethos. They are engaged with the ethos of the course, but others are just ticking a box. But what I'll say at the end of the trimester, all students have reflected on their internship experiences where they've developed employability skills and gained knowledge about the importance of SDGs from a business perspective for these for-purpose organisations. And so I use the SDGs as a compass for thinking and designing for impact in communities have like local and global relevance. So that's a little bit of because with my course with core and elective students, this course is open to all cohorts across all disciplines at the university. So it's a really interesting mix of people who are really passionate about sustainability. Some students and other students who are like taking it because obviously it's a core, and then sustainability may not be their focus, but it's a big part of our course. So by the end of it, we gave them some knowledge, and they're working with the organisations in real world situations there. So with the SDGs.
I think
Yep.
so I just have this listening to both of your comments and thinking about my own reflections of core, compulsory core students. And I think that what we're saying here is that at the end of the term, whether you started as a conscript or started as a volunteer, you sort of leave converted in the view of the need for responsible practice, business practices. Do you think there is still a gap across society, if that makes sense? So we're all talking about it. And I think, you raised the lovely comment, Susie, that you were talking to somebody who was a former corporate responsibility officer. Do you think that there's still a gap that in society, if you're not in our classrooms, if you're not working in a business where they're actually putting this at the fore, there's still a gap that's occurring there? I'm just curious. Might sort of start with you, Charmaine, and then move through to you, Susie.
Look, I think there's definitely a gap. And when I talk to students about it, one of the things is they think, and feedback that I've received at like the end of their term or the internship really looks at that gap in knowledge that students have about the UN SDGs. And the organisations and services and programs that directly address and work towards those SDGs. And a common misconception from the students is that the perceived SDGs can only be addressed by government. But after completing the course, they realise that change does happen at a community level. So one of the students summed it up beautifully with this quote. They said, "During my internship, my knowledge of the SDGs has changed significantly. In the beginning, I thought they were more so for politicians and they were for broader goals for countries to work towards. However, through my first-hand experience as a volunteer, I see now that for us to have progress in SDGs, we need to contribute at every level, including at the individual and community level." So I think that's quite a profound sort of comment from that student. But as far as the organisations that my courses work with, we asked them at the start, are they addressing some of the SDGs? And one of the gaps that I've found is that a lot of these for-purpose organisations, they don't realise that they actually are addressing the SDGs. And one of the key things is that if they did know that, and I encourage my students to talk to their supervisors, that they could put in applications for funding from government saying, look, we are addressing this SDG through the services and programs that we develop. And I think that's a really key thing, that the organisations are in the forefront, that they are addressing SDGs and that they can get funding and improve their work around that with a little bit more knowledge, I guess, and push towards the SDGs in their businesses.
I think that you raise a really valuable point there. If I'm doing something that's inherently in addressing the SDGs and I don't know that that's an SDG, then how do we measure the progress towards those SDGs? So, Susie, but I'm curious to answer the previous question first from you, your thoughts on that. And then maybe you can expand on it to that next point about if we don't know, so if we don't label it, as such, does labeling help, the process?
So to your first point, I think the students that come through the course, they expect to do good, but they often feel really disillusioned when they're discovering through what they're learning and their assessments that real business environments seem disconnected from those ideals that they're learning in the classroom. So talking about responsible business education and values practice, it needs to really close that gap by incorporating those lived experiences and ethical dilemmas into teaching. So students increasingly seek authenticity. They really engage well with real-world case studies. They engage well with different models, particularly when we look at Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous way of thinking. So the Sustainable Development Goals, I think they're a really great starting point, but they're not the end goal. So I think ethical reasoning, critical systems thinking, even things like emotional intelligence, social responsibility, they're all things that sort of frame the course in terms of responsible business education. The Sustainable Development Goals focus on what needs changing, but responsible business education, I like to look at it as, you know, how to ethically engage with systems of power and complexity through the lens of, mostly we look at business narratives. Interdisciplinary content is something that works really well, connecting business with ecology, sociology, psychology, history as well. And that focus on ethical reasoning is something that we apply a lot, not just the knowledge recall.
So I think it's really an interesting thing, because I don't think we would pull up anybody today in the street and they would say that they don't care. You know, we call it, so where we are at University of New South Wales, where, for those of you who don't know geographically, we're on a very large 4-lane road called Anzac Parade, with a tram that runs down the centre of it and buses that do as well. So it's sort of it's about 6 lanes when you stack it out. And I worked with a colleague who called it the Anzac Parade test, right? If I stopped somebody and asked them this, what would they be likely to say? And we know that young people, not only young people, but, you know, certainly a solid number of the students that we would deal with are young people. And I know when I ask young people, you know, do they care? They say absolutely. And then what I find is they only care to the point of when they might be inconvenienced. So it's this really, I think, difficult situation. So in my classroom, we can watch, and, you know, remember, I've got maybe 300 or 400 people every day, like every session for 4 sessions a week. And I can watch the disposable cups disappear, and the disposable, you know, the single-use plastics, and the things like we ask them to keep an eye on, you know, are they shopping for, you know, fast fashion, or, you know, and how are they disposing of fast fashion? And, you know, like, so thinking about those sorts of things as something that they can practically do to take them away from this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness in a bigger system. But I do find that when I talk to them, sometimes they'll say things and they'll start the conversation on me. Oh, you know, like they've got, you know, the disposable cup or disposable bottle in their hand. Oh, you know, I was running late today, or I left home without it. And I think to myself, as somebody who's, you know, got my, you know, my reusable bottle, my reusable cup, I go, I feel like I leave home with another home in my bag, right? I've got my cup, my cutlery, my drink bottle. But I do understand that that can be quite challenging when you're trying to organize yourself in the world generally. Do you think that there is a real challenge for our students to come across this, when part of the challenge could be around the inconvenience over convenience? Might start with you, Susie.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, the world that we live in, convenience is a barrier. I found that authentic learning experiences, agency, they're things that can break through that apathy. So when students look at Goal 12, which is responsible consumption and production, And they look at that through the lens of different types of audit tasks. So one of the things we use is the ecological footprint, but there are multiple tasks that they do. But when they start to look at their own consumption habits, then that's when they start to see the connections between their own personal action and that broader systemic change. So, and, once they realise that their voice matters and, that business is part of that solution, that's when we see a real shift in their mindset.
What about for you, Charmaine?
Yeah, like I think that, that authentic experience is really important in our course. And I think that, looking at students understanding the importance of the SDGs to business. So if I look at, organisations that we work for and the students are working for, say, take Oz Harvest. That's a really important one. And I think that by students being there day by day, in and out with these professionals working in that space, they can actually see the importance of zero hunger and good health and well-being. And students working in schools can see the importance of education. And I think that's the key thing. So, yeah, so maybe they might feel a bit inconvenienced, like if they don't want to learn about SDGs in the course, but once they're out there in the organisations, they can see the importance that it's bringing to these community organisations and for purpose organisations. So they mightn't think much about zero hunger or health and well-being, but we have students working in mental health organisations and working with people with disability, ageing, etc. And I think that just their realization through the course that, hang on a sec, these SDGs are being addressed and they are important, I think changes their mindset, right? And their perception about SDGs. So yes, individually, they may be struggling with SDGs at home or sustainability, but I think that they can see the importance of those SDGs to people in communities and businesses. So I think it's a real shift, yeah.
Do you think that business, so, moving away from the for purpose sector, because I think it's, when you're having also spent some time in the for purpose sector, it really does, smack you clean in the face and say, actually, we need to progress here. And I often think it's, if I hadn't been part of, there's a program, I know that in Melbourne, it's called the Williamson Foundation. In Sydney, it's called Sydney Leadership. I know that in the UK, it's called Common Purpose. So these exist all around the world. They're like a social MBA. And so they expose you to these problems and you start to say, how do we as a business, the whole idea is to bring businesses in to do this and how they might partner. But I think that one of the things that I often think about is, day to day when I'm in a corporation, are they putting this high enough in the visibility scale? Excuse me, or is it still a, shareholders first? Oh yes, and now you mention it, we'll think about stakeholders. Oh, and if that, then if we can give a little bit back at a philanthropic level, sure, we might do it, rather than a overarching. So often when I teach this sort of work, I'll often come from if your business isn't doing good, then it may just be doing bad, right? So we have to do good to be, a business should be doing good and giving back in some way, and so I used to be the head of learning at Optus Communications, and they very heavily sponsored Starlight Foundation. I think that was the first time I'd worked somewhere where the business really front and center said, this is what we are doing. And not only are we doing this as a corporation and we encourage you to be part of that, but if you've got a passion project, please come to us and we'll find how we can support you with that as well. Do you think we're seeing enough of that in those big businesses, the banks, the consulting firms, or is there still a long way to go?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a long way to go. I mean, if you look at the SDGs, those targets were supposed to be met by 2030 by businesses, right? Australia are behind. If we look at all the other nations, we are not in the top 10. I can tell you that right now. So from a business perspective, we need to do more. And yes, it needs to be at the forefront. I know that my university and a lot of universities now, sustainability is built into curriculum and it's really important. But I think that we need to work with industry as partners to try and get them to focus on the SDGs as a main business focus. So yeah, we are behind compared to the rest of the world. So I think, yeah, we're not businesses aren't addressing it. It's not at the forefront at this stage.
What about for you, Susie? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And even here at the university, you know, business schools often focus on rankings and graduate employability. So the idea of responsible business education, I think, is undervalued unless it's linked to skills and leadership. So yeah, I think faculty need training in this area. They need more resources, you know, room to experiment with how and what they teach. And I think also the other thing is that leadership needs to walk the talk. Similarly in business. So, I mean, in the course, we tend to focus on business cases that appear to be doing the right thing, but when you dig deeper, they're not doing the right thing. I mean, and this is a first year course, but in third year courses and in the postgraduate courses, we do focus on some of those businesses that really are walking the talk and how they're doing that. So that's kind of positive, but there are quite a few barriers and enablers there in business and at university.
I think I saw something really extraordinary while I was working in Manchester. So I've just returned from special studies program where I've been living and working in Manchester. And what I discovered working there was the absolute social inclusion. So there was a restaurant nearby the campus, like right next door to literally my office. And one of my colleagues said, let's go and have lunch here. And she said to me, I just need to tell you, this is actually a social enterprise, right? As I went in, that was all she said. She said, I just don't want you to expect this to be, you know, your regular cafe. It was useful that she told me that because the service was a little bit perhaps not as polished as it might be. But I can tell you that the food was some of the best food I ate. And it was the most authentic experience I had. And then anyway, then a couple of weeks later, I was meeting somebody from a journal and they said, oh, you know, as you're out of town, let's meet off campus and we'll go to this place. And it was like a movie theater. Okay. And it had a coffee shop and it had an art gallery. It was, you know, swish, right? So I walked in and I went, oh, this is amazing. You know, what a beautiful building and this coffee shop. And we're sitting in these lovely big chairs and having coffee and the rain's pouring down outside. And all of a sudden I went, I'm sitting in a social enterprise and I didn't know it. So we finished having coffee and then I decided I would go back to see a movie there rather than go to a mainstream cinema. So I got talking to the people and they said, oh, we're really pleased that you came back and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yes, we're underpinned by a social enterprise. And I went, wow, this social enterprise is not just about just about sounds terrible, but you know, like when Charmaine talks about, you know, OzHub, so it's easy to find those for-purpose businesses that you know are addressing an exact community need, whereas this was really community integrated everywhere. And so what I found was I was continually coming across something that was some form of social enterprise without it being branded such. You know, we're not doing this to solve hunger, we're not doing this to solve homelessness, and yet it was. And it was skills-based and it was rich and enveloping in a whole of community approach. I don't know that I see as much of that in Australia. I'm just wondering what you observe and what you see around that. And do you think that's something that would be really valuable for our students to see?
Definitely, that's actually one of the things that we look at in one of our weeks is social enterprise organisations and their work within the communities and businesses. So students are not aware a lot of those social enterprise businesses. So we do a bit of a research and case studies on social enterprise. And I think that some of the students actually go out and work in social enterprise area. But I think that it's a really important area that we look in as well. So yeah, they may not be that evident, but you know, giving them knowledge about social enterprise, I think is really important, Lynn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd love to just see. I know that if there was something that was a social enterprise in my neck of the woods, you know, I probably would go and buy my coffee from there. I probably would go and have a meal from there. I probably would use that as a cinema over a commercial cinema. I know that there's inclusive dance and all those sorts of things. So I try and do a number of things around that. But I often think to myself, as somebody who lives in the inner city of Sydney, I think to myself, surely we could set up a coffee shop. Surely we could look to employ people, around the university, even in a space that would give people a chance to understand. I think to myself all the time, imagine if I worked in the coffee shop here and I had no exposure, and I worked at the coffee shop, and after a little while I went, wow, people are friendly, the academics are friendly, the other people are friendly. It would all of a sudden feel very much more possible for me to come, right? I wouldn't feel like an outsider. And I wonder if that's part of our strategies to actually become more inclusive in our education as well. So, thoughts, Susie?
Yes, several thoughts. So we have a cafe on campus here where you can go and order a coffee, and they will give you a card that shows you the exact farmer that grew the coffee that you're drinking, and all the tasting notes around the coffee and everything like that, which I really love. It's not a social enterprise, but it is partially. There's another business that I go to regularly, a cafe, who a graduate of mine when I used to work at Le Cordon Bleu. They run that business, and it's a zero waste business. They do use that in their branding, that they're zero waste, but they don't advertise that they're a social enterprise, but they really are. The other person that I work with, and I had her on a panel for an anti-slavery lunchtime talk that we did last year, and she is based in Adelaide, and she owns a coffee business. She is from Brazil, and she sources coffee from Brazil. She works with the farmers, helps them with their business model, and they're all tiny micro businesses, and she sources only from farmers who grow their own coffee ethically, with, there's no slavery identified anywhere in the supply chain. And she sells that coffee on to lots of different cafes here in Adelaide. And it's beautiful coffee from Brazil, has those lovely dark chocolate and caramel notes in it.
Spoken like a true coffee drinker.
Yeah, well, I was a chef and a barista in a past life. And I also had the great pleasure just very recently of writing a course on social enterprise and sustainability for the new Adelaide University when we merge next year. So I was very excited about that, and a lovely course. Sometimes when you write new courses, they can be really dry, but this one, it was great, and it was really good to bring in global examples, local examples, like the two that I just spoke about. We brought those two in as case studies, and just such a positive thing to teach, that just gives you joy,
Yeah. So I'm really curious now about, how do we, so yes, we can give students, experience of going into these businesses. But I do think there is a real gap between the student that's in my class. I mean, maybe not in the class that Charmaine's teaching from what you were saying. But I do think there is a gap often between the person who's in our class and the lived experience of them, and the need to be able to, for businesses to do the stuff that's really important. I know I do a week particularly, or did, I'm not teaching the course, I've just stepped back from teaching it, but I used to do a whole week on why the arts are adaptive and why the arts, why companies should sponsor the arts, and I use the example of, from La Boheme to Rent to Moulin Rouge, and, and say, if you haven't seen one of these, you should watch it, because you need to ask yourself about, are these people on the fringe of society or actually an important part of society, and how do they change society? And I find that really gets students to go, oh, my world is here, not here, or, do you see that as a challenge for our students, that there is a gap often between their lived experience and, that they're studying business often to go into the world of business? They're thinking about the big banks, the big consulting firms, the big four accounting / consulting firms. They've got the stars in their eyes about, I want to work for, whether it's somewhere like Amazon, or, often my students will say, I want to work for Alibaba, or I want to work for Shine. They usually don't say that because I think they're in a sustainability course, but I know that some of them, that's what they would like to do. Do you think that it's our job to bridge it, or do you think it's somebody else's job, and if it is, how do we do that? What do you think is the challenge for us in bridging that lived experience?
I guess that guiding principle of equity through curriculum. So, being intentional in using inclusive teaching strategies that I guess validate different students' perspectives. A really broad range of case studies is useful there, like cultural, different socioeconomic contexts. I find students, and it always surprises me, but they really, we address Indigenous-led perspectives in 3 out of the 10 topics that we have in this course, Business and Society. And I'm always surprised about how engaged they are when they learn about those different perspectives. But we also look at Indigenous perspectives from globally as well.
Mm.
And I guess thinking about who gets heard about sustainability, we try and help them to see that, or I suppose how their own experiences and perspectives matter in becoming responsible leaders. So I guess just underpinning that intentionality of using inclusive teaching strategies that are kind of validating those different perspectives.
What about for you, Charmaine?
Yeah, I think that obviously I have business students as well in my courses, and that I think you hit the nail on the head in one way, is that they're working. If they're going to a career, it's going to be for a profit organisation, right? So maybe SDGs is in the back of their mind rather than in the forefront. So I think that that's a real challenge for us to educate them on the importance of SDGs in business practices. And in my course, I always have the Dean of Sustainability come along and do a guest lecture for me as a professional in the area on sustainability, which is really informative for the students. But like the focus is to really make our students change agents in whatever career they go into. So if we can give them a little bit of knowledge about SDGs, and they can go and maybe mention it, or have something in their mind about the businesses they're going into, I mean, that can only be a positive. But yes, that gap, I mean, the lived experience of the students in my course is going out firsthand and realizing the importance of what the organisations are doing, the importance of SDGs really changes a lot of their mindsets around sustainable development goals. They may not go into that in their future, but it has given them a little bit of a taste and a little bit of knowledge in that area. And I found that I got a random LinkedIn post from one of my past students who was a business student, and spoke to me about, thank you for the course. It's really changed my life, my family's life. I'm not focusing on business now. I'm going into a for-profit organisation, working with youth, and looking at the SDGs within that area. So that was really rewarding for me as an academic to have that. But there's other things as well that I direct the students to, like the Ethical Jobs website. That's a really interesting one, because obviously their values are aligned. The students who take the electives and some of the core students, their values are aligned with Ethical Jobs, which address all that stuff about being inclusive and SDGs and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think that it's really important, and just giving them some knowledge and closing that gap about their knowledge about SDGs and the importance is critical in the courses that I teach. So yeah.
And I think it's even more than just where it's a course that is actually about sustainability or actually about ethics. But as somebody who's now teaching, like industrial relations, for example, and and management and AI, I take those core messages of responsible business through everything. Like it's having a conversation, whether it's, if you're a company and you're having a conversation with an employer group or a union, that's actually responsible business, because, treating employees well, is just good business, right? Because otherwise you'll have too high a churn and you won't be able to attract good talent, and you don't want to be the person who's the reason why somebody doesn't go home that night, right? So that's sort of OH&S thing as well. So I want to say thank you very much for the conversation. And we said that we would, spend the last 15 minutes broadening the conversation. I'm curious to now hear from people who are here today, and maybe Guy, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. And then we'll sort of move around. But Guy, do you see a need for more discussion about responsible business education, or do you think there's enough happening?
Here in the business school in Auckland, we have a thematic lead now. It's a bit of a thing. I'm the thematic lead in artificial intelligence, but we've got one in sustainability. That was actually the first appointment in that role, and their position, their responsibilities to help embed sustainability thinking, particularly the SDGs, which obviously are an anchor point, as I was discussing with Charmaine at the start, to embed that thinking throughout the curriculum. Right from part one, undergraduate, right through to professional programs, MBAs, etc. So I think so. I think it's something we're seeing being taken very seriously here at the business school. Can't talk for other faculties, but I know from the Vice Chancellor's office we're seeing that kind of connection being made as well. So I think it is really, really important. And more broadly, our new graduate profile, which is being rolled down from the top, really reflects sustainability as well. So that kind of embeds the need to be shaping graduates and all the curricula around how we take them through the programs. That will be a graduate capability, an understanding of sustainability and their role in that. So I think you're absolutely right. It is really important. I think another question I'd love to ask. Sorry, Lynn.
It just seems that it's relatively new.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah,
it's something that we've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really been an inflection point, I'd say, over the last 12, 18 months. Absolutely. It's not something that's been embedded for very long. It's definitely a change we're seeing. Yeah.
Sorry, and you had a question.
Yeah, just again, bringing AI into the subject. One of the things, because I'm getting a little bit more exposed in my role to some of the discussions happening at the central office within the university here. And I know one of the things they're talking about as they consider how they might scale and build capacity and how they might want to do that in AI. Obviously, the trade-offs there around the value and utility of AI versus the overall holistic impact on sustainability at the very simplest terms, the energy consumption, etc. So I just wonder whether you've got any thoughts, guidance, ideas, or just broad opinions on that, because it is a very topical thing.
Dare I say, Guy, you might need to read the chapter that I've just finished writing this morning about it. Right?
Excellent. I'd love to.
Because I think there is really a very big question that, yes, AI is power hungry. It needs water to cool the systems. It's, and I remember being in Amsterdam. No, sorry, in Copenhagen 18 months ago, and there was a big sign, and the big sign said, "Hey, ChatGPT, if you stopped working for just 1 hour, you could feed the world's homeless." It was written in Danish, and it really, I was like, oh, what does that sign say? So I took a photo, did the Google Translate, so I was using AI to make it work, and then it said that, and it really pulled me up in my tracks, because it made me think about not just for fun. So we all know that there's been this big sort of push about, making this sort of action figure out of AI. And it's really interesting because I haven't done it. And the reason I haven't done it is because I want to be able to put my hand on my heart and say, I'm not playing here. I'm actually using it for work. I'll play to increase my ability to work with it, etc. But not just for the heck of it. So I always remember saying to our former director of AI, Professor Alex Steele, he said to me one day, "Oh, Lynn, have you used it to do this?" Right? And I said, "No." And he looked at me and I said, "Because there's only so many hours in the day, and I'm actually really interested in using it to make my life and my students' life better." And I think that if we start to ask those fundamental questions of people, right? So just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And before we do it, am I doing this purposefully, right? And with consideration, we can't look, there's always unintended consequences, right? And I think that anybody who says, "Oh, I consider all the unintended consequences," please introduce them to me because I'd love to know how to do it, right? But I think that if we actually start and say, there are lots of ways we can play, but if this play is harming the earth, maybe we need to be a little bit more mindful, right? And I think that that is a really important thing. So one of the premises that I teach my students from the get-go in anything that I teach is, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And is what we're doing on balance better overall? And if you start there, not with the ends justify the means, so that, teleological perspective of, if it's all okay in the end, it's all okay. But more, and not even that deontological ethics of, do unto others, but more that utilitarian view of, is this for greater good? Be a good human, what is a good human? So more from that virtue ethics, care ethics, feminist ethics perspective. And that really resonates with people because people go, "Oh, I do want to think of myself as a good human being." And that tends to give them really good guiding principles to go forward. But that's only from my own perspective. I don't know if Charmaine or Susie have got comments on that as well.
Susie, you want to go first, Susie? Yeah.
No, you go first because I'm still processing that.
Yeah, look, within our course, it's so important with using AI. A lot of the industries, the businesses are using it. The students need to be educated around, ethical and responsible use of AI, so that we do have a in my course essentials, they do a little module on that as well. But just learning to write reports, learning to write for organizations, even just learning to write a professional email to these businesses. Some students don't even have those skills. So, I mean, using AI in those areas is important for our students. But, as Lynn said, using it ethically is the important thing. But, writing grants as well. So really important stuff that organisations are doing. They're using AI. Our students need to be educated in that space to be able to go out to, for employability purposes, to be able to go out in organisations, be able to have those skills. So I think, yes, using it, but, the responsible way of using it, Lynn, is the key there, definitely.
And I guess the reason why it's taken me a little while to process all of that is that I'm still at that stage where I'm working through how can I use AI in the courses that I teach responsibly. And we know that industry is telling us they want graduates who know how to use AI, but I'm not really at that point where I've been given explicit information about exactly what it is that they want our graduates to be able to do. So I've had to play around with that social enterprise and sustainability course that I developed. I had to play around with using AI in one of the assessments where students use it in their group assignment as a creative thinking tool, because entrepreneurship underpins the course. So creativity and innovation is a big learning outcome for them. So using it as a creative thinking methodology I think that would work really well to help students come up with ideas, because students often, especially first years, have trouble with ideation. But in terms of using it responsibly, integrating it into business education, yeah, I'm not quite there yet, to be honest, but I'm really enjoying playing around with it. Like, as a PA, it's doing a great job for me.
I once referred to it as a ever willing but very junior subordinate. I'm actually co-teaching with AI from this term on. So I'll be actually and trying to get my students to understand that what the difference is between coming to uni and just learning it on your own is that my job is to guide you in the what to learn and the why to learn it, and the making meaning of that in a responsible manner, rather than just following what you're interested in, creating your own echo chamber or believing you actually know enough. So I think that's really sort of an interesting perspective, but really always coming back to that, just because I can doesn't mean I should. So I'm curious, any questions from anybody else? Elaine, Sandy, Nigel, Pinzia?
I really resonate with what you just said, Lynn. It's that whole, like in education, it's about connecting the global with the personal, the theoretical with the practical, the values with the vocational. So only educators can do that.
Well, and learning is a relational experience for many people as well. Not always, right? But it can be. Yeah.
It can be.
So, you know, and I think that where it is, it's quite different, right? If somebody, I think that what we're talking about if I take Charmaine's example, you know, where they're going in, they're working with Oz Harvest, or perhaps where they've experienced homelessness firsthand, then that's that relational connection where the desire to make change is often wrapped up in the significant emotional experience which carries that forward. And I think that when we look at responsible business education, it's that coming back to that the core foundation that responsible business education is actually about more than shareholders, right? It is actually about stakeholders. It is about doing things that help the community at large, because you can't just build a building. And, you know, the example I give my students is I go, so, you know, at UNSW, we take up a whole suburb, we're quite big. But I say, you know, imagine if that meant that you couldn't get into your home, or there was a garbage smell every day, or, you know, the music was so loud, or, you know, so we have to be a good citizen for everybody around us. But also because we do a number of things, like we run a solar car challenge, which all the local, not even just so local to us, but all the schools in Sydney can come to and build a solar car and do all of that. And that's that good education and making that accessible. They don't need anything. We have the eggs for them. We have the solar panels, et cetera, and they get a t-shirt, right? So we give them all of that for the day, and it's part of our open day. So obviously it adds to the vibe, but it is good education, quality education for all. Being a good citizen, you know, making our pool available, our sports fields available, our physios available, our medical clinics available, all of those things, you know, when you start to look at business, at not just a university, but businesses, are they doing that? Are they creating that space? And I loved during COVID, for example, that so many hotels actually went, yeah, we will give over our rooms because they're not being utilized, to actually keep homeless people safe right now. So I think that when we ask businesses to actually think about what they could do with, you know, unused space, unused capacity, and not just monetize it, you know, like Amazon did when they created their web services, but actually start to think about how do we make the you know, the world a bit better. Elaine's got a question here. Have you found particular pedagogies or assessment approaches particularly effective, that feels more authentic than tokenistic? I might answer that first and then hand over to the other two very briefly before we close off. But I actually asked students to capture the impact that they had made in the world. So I wanted them to capture it from things like, so I use a transformational pedagogy throughout the course. And so we talk about this as uncomfortable. This is not about giving you answers, but about opening questions. And then one of the things that we do is we ask them to create impact statements on how what they're doing has made the world better, just not for them, but also for the world. So, you know, by doing this one action, I realized I could impact this, and this is what it's meant for me, how I feel and how I am. And we get them to actually talk about that, not just write it. So that we find that then they can really talk from the heart. So hopefully that's a bit of an insight. Anything quickly from, because we're right on 1 o'clock. Susie.
Yeah. Susan, go first. Yep.
Well, yeah, we in our course we use pedagogy of kindness. So we recognise students as whole people. We design the assessments and give feedback that's empathetic. We create a really supportive learning environment. We listen actively and we respond with care. So that's been working extremely well for us.
And Charmaine, just to close off.
Yeah. Just quickly, I use a lot of different things, but looking at regenerative, the new sustainability approach in content with assessments. There's a couple of different assessments. The undergraduates do a newsletter for their organisation or a LinkedIn article about sustainability and the programs and services that the organisation are addressing, and give examples of services and programs. So they get really involved in that newsletter that they develop, that the undergrads. The masters actually do a PowerPoint report on looking at sustainability, what the organisations, they look at an issue in the organisation, then they link it to sustainable development goals, then they provide recommendations that can be applied to industry, and then they talk about, well, what could be the results of those. So they seem to involve the students in the SDGs quite well, and they get involved because it's a quite a big project for the masters. So basically that's what I do. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'd like to say thanks so much to Susie and Charmaine today for joining me in this conversation, and to Guy and Sandy for their organisation and help, and Sandra's amazing work for running our Business SIG. And thank you all for coming along. And for those who are listening later on, we hope that this has given you some ideas to how you might actually bring sustainability or enhance it within your teaching for responsible business education. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lynn. Bye.
Lynn, have you got 2 seconds?
Sure. Recording stop, please, Guy.